This is a story about innocence and guilt, the short distance between the two, and how rage and mistrust left people unable to tell the difference. It's the story of how one night of rioting illuminated the racial fault lines running through 1980s Britain. It's the story of how a London policeman, Keith Blakelock, met his death at the hands of a raging mob, and how failures of police leadership made that death more likely.
And you could see machete blades coming across the top of the shields. I remember thinking to myself, if I can get out of this, I've still got this to deal with behind.
It's that feeling that you're penned in and trapped. And they were shouting, kill the bill, kill the pigs.
It's the story of how, in their outrage, the press created a monster to stalk the nightmares of Middle England.
Get off me! Get off me!
Winston Silcott.
It's like a stereotype, in my case, this big black man to be fearful of.
It's the story of how the murder investigation sowed the seeds of its own failure and led to a notorious miscarriage of justice. Above all, it's a story of why, 18 years on, there's still a sense of injustice on both sides, and how this stands in the way of resolving the unanswered question. For many people, the events of 6th of October 1985 on the Broadwater Farm estate in North London conjure up a distant memory of inner-city turmoil. For those present that night, though, it remains very much more than that. My name is Kurt Barling. I had friends who grew up on the farm, and by a quirk of fate, I was there at the start of that night. I'd come to drop off my brother-in-law, who was new to the area. As I pulled away, another car pulled in to get directions.
Excuse me, mate. Yeah? Can you tell me where the farm is?
A farm in Tottenham. My brother-in-law had never heard of the farm, but he soon would. His flatmate's car would be one of the first to be set alight as the riot took hold. 9 months earlier, the Broadwater Farm had been a place fit for a princess.
Finally, the Princess of Wales.
Drawn by the improvements made by the Youth Association and Harringay Council, the Princess of Wales came to perform an official opening ceremony.
I mean, the buzz in the community was fantastic. The royal family, you know, looking down on what we're doing, the changes we're making, it was colourful. I mean, it really was a great day. I think she thoroughly enjoyed it.
They had found ties that I'd never actually seen before. A lot of the men had found jackets. They had made a wonderful effort, and there was a great feeling of genuineness and joy about the day.
But not everybody was pleased to see Diana.
I'll never forget Princess Diana's personal protection officer coming up to me and being very, very concerned that there was one individual who was quite clearly out of place and therefore a potential threat.
Who was that?
And that was Winston Silcott.
Dressed in combat fatigues, his normal work clothes, Winston Silcott stood at the back of the room and shouted his displeasure.
Winston felt that
We probably should have had us open it because it was a black centre for black youth. We probably shouldn't have been doing something so glitzy. I mean, the local authorities spent quite a bit in making sure that this happened. So no, he didn't support it at all. And you know, he came there and he said, we don't want Diana, we want jobs, we want work.
Years later, the tabloids would hype up this encounter. To the Tottenham police, the episode fed the reputation of Winston Silcott as a violent gang leader with attitude.
Winston, I think, had some degree of aggression towards police, and equally, be careful. I think if you were to be on your own and stop him and you were to end up into a physical confrontation, he was quite a powerful individual.
Within 2 years of Diana's visit, Silcott would be convicted of the murder of London policeman Keith Blakelock. And the newspapers would trumpet the judge's description of Silcott as an evil and dangerous man.
The majority of newspapers don't give you facts. They're selling you a story. But I always believed in the end, because what happened to me was so blatant, the truth would will out.
Winston Silcott was raised in a God-fearing home in Tottenham.
Hurry up, Winston! Quick, otherwise you're going to be late!
It seems an unlikely place from which to start a criminal career.
I was around about, say, 12 to 13, and it was not too far away from Christmas, so I decided to buy Mum a Christmas present. So I went to the local chemist, which was not too far from the school, just across the road really. Went in there and I bought a cheap bottle of perfume. As I was coming back into the school, I came across a teacher, and the teacher asked me what I had in the bag.
Winston Silcott?
Yes, miss?
Come over here and bring it with you.
The teacher asked me for a receipt, so I started to search my pocket and I couldn't find the receipt.
Now, where did you get this from?
I bought it, miss, from the chemist. I paid for it myself.
There's an easy way of checking on it. Follow me.
The teacher decided to confiscate a bottle of perfume from me. So I was just wondering, that's a bit strange, that they must have thought I stole the bottle of perfume.
Many black youngsters in the 70s were still enthralled to their strict church-going parents.
I have a young coloured boy here.
Humiliations like this introduced them to prejudice and sowed the seeds of discontent, even resentment.
He did? Oh, right. Thank you very much.
Our way to deal with it was to say eventually, fuck it. This is what you say we are. This is how you keep on treating us. Well, just watch this. And it's also how you treat our parents. And our parents are decent, gentle people. So we're not going to be gentle. We're not going to turn the other cheek and allow you to do this to us. England is where we were born. We've got nowhere else to go. So we're going to stay and we're going to fight for it.
For many, that fight began at Broadwater Farm. From the late 70s, the farm was neglected by Haringey Council and turned into a dumping ground for problem families. Once it started to go downhill, the labyrinth of stairwells and walkways turned the place into a policeman's nightmare. This model was a central part of a police contingency plan. It helped officers learn the complicated geography of the farm and to plan in the event of real trouble. Seldom would there be a place in which lack of local knowledge would prove so deadly.
You look at it and you think, oh, I bet somebody spent, the best part of their life designing this. But then if you take a perspective of how you would need to respond to it in a policing context, you can see immediately that it does represent a number of difficulties.
So what about the walkways?
A very difficult policing problem. On the basis that they are above you at ground level, then obviously they do represent quite a significant problem.
In day-to-day operations, the police had a degree of control at ground level. But local youths had the run of the estate's walkways. Rocks, paving slabs, televisions and fridges routinely dropped out of the sky. Every officer who patrolled the farm's concrete wastes had a story to tell.
The farm was one of those wonderful 1960s architect-created edifices which may have looked good, but it was not designed to minimise crime opportunities. We were driving an unmarked police car through the estate, and as we were going underneath the walkway of Tangmere Block, a metal beer barrel landed on our car just in front of the windscreen. If it hit us on the roof, it would have been quite a serious event.
Would have killed you?
It could have done. Could have done. It's not the way I like my beer served up.
These walkways converged on the deck of the notorious Tangmere house, which the police regarded as the source of many of their problems. The deck of Tangmere was at the heart of the farm. What were once shops are now flats. The deck, now fenced off, allowed access all around the block. The stairwells brought you up from the car park below. All over the farm, police officers patrolled in pairs for safety, but here especially. Parents of youngsters growing up around the farm looked on bewildered as the estate's reputation sank. The farm could be a thoroughly nasty place to live or to work as a policeman.
Bye, Mum. Just off the church.
Okay, Winston. Take care now.
But there was more to it than this. There was a growing sense among black youths that most police saw being criminal and being black as the same thing.
You had some police that were racist. You had some police that were inexperienced. You know, and people was just getting arrested and snatched and searched and all things, you know, that are degraded. You know what I mean? And people just didn't want that, you know, and it was always happening to the young black people.
We were young, we were full of testosterone, we were angry, frustrated and bitter, and we made some bad decisions. And our way of dealing with things was really to put two fingers up to society and its rules. If you're not going to allow us to participate in your society, then to you. And basically that's what we did. And we went off the rails.
There was a time, within the space of 4 hours, I've been stopped 5 times. Twice by the same 2 police officers.
Mind you, people did have choices. Plasford Sterling went into the army. Winston Silcott and Stafford Scott went into other people's houses.
With the earlier stops by police, when you weren't doing nothing, you came to a stage where you just thought, well, they're going to stop you for doing this anyway, so you might as well do it. So that's what happened.
Winston Silcott and friends built criminal reputations, breaking their way into homes across North London.
Go, 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 go.
In 1977, Winston Silcott pleaded guilty to 9 counts of burglary and was sent to Borstal. Stafford Scott was jailed for 3 years.
And I think what we tried to do was to put fear back into the white society, the wider community, the same kind of fear and anger that we felt.
In 1981, this anger exploded onto the inner city streets of Bristol, Brixton and Toxteth.
Toxteth on Merseyside also experienced a similar explosion of violence. Again, police found themselves at
The police were startled by the undeclared civil war raging in their midst and by the lack of leadership within the force. Their response was twofold. They got properly tooled up in anticipation of future trouble.
Specially trained district support units were equipped with mitre shields, protective helmets and fire-resistant suits. Their positive response...
At the same time, the police adopted softer community policing to try and avoid confrontation in the first place. But Tottenham police still felt able to run an aggressive stop and search operation, calling it All Sorts.
We had not got a background and a good track record in this area in terms of getting into the community. This was a division which was part of a district that had a culture of more effort and attention going into policing Tottenham Hotspur Football Club than it has in community relations.
The commander in Tottenham was an old-fashioned hardliner, Jim Dickinson.
I think there might be a section of people who would have thought that we were concentrating too much on perhaps the Broadwater Farm area and the youth, but this was the seat of the trouble, and obviously you've got to go for that.
For traditional law enforcers like Dickinson, community policing was code for race relations. He didn't see this as his job. He believed he served the community best by catching criminals, white and black. In your view, what was the best way of making things work down there on Broadwater Farm?
Policing, normal or high-profile policing, as a deterrent to those who would come out for the main purpose of robbery at that time, and they were plenty.
In the face of groups of aggressive youths from ethnic minorities, the ordinary policeman was confused. Was he supposed to be nasty or nice? What some police called bending over backwards. Tension between the community policing focus and strict law enforcement fed those intent on confrontation. It was easy for any racist police officer to say he was only enforcing the law. It was just as tempting for the young black hoodlum to claim he was being persecuted for his colour. These contradictions were keenly felt on the farm. In the summer of 1983, Jeff Betts was among a group of officers called to the farm to arrest a suspected drug dealer.
I drove the van down to the scene, and by the time I got there, there was a crowd of maybe 30 or 40. They were just watching. I went to the back of the crowd to just keep an eye on things, make sure I didn't get out of hand. I detected movement, and I looked round, and there was a chap about 5 yards from me running towards me with a knife. It was a knife probably similar in length to that, my impression, but obviously a wider blade. You know, a real sort of Boy Scout old-fashioned sheath knife. He was sort of crouched down, running sort of like this for some reason. Yeah, it wasn't sort of that way, it was definitely there, sort of roundhouse swing. I carry on turning, but obviously I don't turn enough because the knife still, it goes round back of me and sort of in just there.
While Jeff Betts fought for his life in intensive care, the hunt for his attacker began.
I got just an impression of a thin-faced chap with a straggly, wispy, goatee-type beard and a funny hat on his head.
I think a name came in the frame reasonably quickly, though. Who was that?
Oh, you're talking about Winston Silcott.
It was always Winston. Winston was a symbolic target. Whenever anything happened, they came to Winston, and part of it was because Winston was a thorn in their side. He was someone who would speak out vociferously against police brutality.
if anything happened in Tottenham at that time, certain police officers were there, as Vincent Silcott, or he had something to do with it.
And so, how did you get word that they wanted to see you about Jeff Betts stabbing?
Well, they contacted the Youth Association. They'd like to see me down at Tottenham Police Station.
Winston Silcott went to the police station, but despite his reputation, he was quickly released. There was no evidence. So had he been fairly accused? Only 2 men know for sure. One of them is Jeff Betts.
So was this fellow who you saw coming in with you with a knife, was it Winston Silcott?
Definitely not. I've seen photographs of him and he'd been pointed out to me in the past, and I'd have known it if it was him.
But some police officers still insist he did it. Such is the potency of the Silcott legend. Police had been watching Winston Silcott for years, but the following autumn they set up round-the-clock surveillance on him and his family. For 2 months they followed his every move. Winston Silcott was no angel, but it's hard now to tell the difference between legend and history. The police saw him as a dangerous gang leader. But could he be responsible for all the crime on the farm? 2 months of round-the-clock police surveillance came up blank. That didn't alter the police view of him, though. Broadwater Farm officers were keeping a log as relations with local youths went downhill. They saw disaster looming.
Near miss from a bottle thrown at us from deck level. No sight of suspect, but lots of warriors around the top of the deck.
Black youths crowding the walkways started to throw missiles at us.
Found 2 empty metal beer barrels, bricks, concrete, etc. on walkway.
In the increasingly hostile atmosphere they described, it would take just 3 small events to push the farm towards the precipice. In early 1985, police ranks were restructured and Jim Dickinson retired.
In fact, I was not replaced, leaving this great void in the middle of leadership and control that had existed in the commander rank for the last 90-odd years.
Though his no-nonsense approach might have added to tensions, his public order experience made Tottenham a hard place to start a riot.
Police car the target of missiles, causing damage to roof.
Fire brigade bottled. While checking out area, a bottle nearly hit us.
At the same time, some of the key community leaders playing a part in keeping crime down on the farm flew out to Jamaica for the summer. Without their vigilance, strange cars and unfamiliar faces started to appear on the estate. Drug dealers were moving in. The police were desperate to avoid confrontation, treading on eggshells and confused over how to handle situations.
I remember that going to the duty officer and saying, look, I've got information about this address, that we think there's drugs being dealt at this address and we'd like to go and get a warrant and search the address. And the duty officer would sort of look at it and say, well, no, we're not going to do it, it's too risky. And we wouldn't go on there. So whilst we sort of operated a uniformed patrol during the day, certainly during the hours of darkness, it was really, really difficult to go on there.
All through that summer, the police feared the worst. And the worst happened. But it didn't start in Tottenham.
Last night, some 400, mainly black youths, roamed the streets. They attacked police and firemen, throwing stones, bricks and petrol bombs. Reinforcements were brought in from neighbouring forces, and by midnight more than 600 officers were trying to contain the violence.
On September the 9th, Handsworth, an ethnically mixed suburb of Birmingham, exploded in an orgy of violence, looting and arson. Douglas Hurd had been appointed Home Secretary in Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government just days before.
I made a mistake over Handsworth. The outbreak came really within days of my being surprisingly made Home Secretary. And I was very keen to show, willing, not in a PR sense, but I was just, wanted to see what was happening and get to grips with it quickly. And in fact, I arrived rather before the riot had died down. It stirred it up again, and people started shouting and milling about in the streets.
Keep moving, please. Keep moving. But as the mob and stones caught up with him, Mr. Hurd found himself on the run. Fears about his personal safety began to rise. His car lost in the crowd, a fortified transit van was summoned. Mr. Hurd was hustled inside and taken out of the area.
But Handsworth, Birmingham was a long way from Tottenham, London, where community-minded Chief Superintendent Colin Couch was in charge. 3 weeks after Handsworth, violence erupted closer to home in Brixton, South London. The riot was sparked when the police mistakenly shot Cherry Gross, a 37-year-old mother in her own home.
When you hear that a black woman has been shot in her home, in her back, when police went executing a warrant looking for a black male, it absolutely takes your breath away. Absolutely takes your breath away. And what I think why the society doesn't understand is why we respond like that. But why we respond like that is because in many cases we think to ourselves, right, that could happen to us. The police could come to my house looking for me.
Senior officers in North London eyed events across the river with apprehension. Policemen on the ground sensed trouble.
We went both to the district headquarters and to Tottenham to speak to the senior officers because of our concerns that everything seemed to be in place, that we just needed one unfortunate incident and that would light the blue touch paper.
Floyd Jarrett was well known for his flash cars. Unfortunately, it frequently got him noticed by more than just his friends.
The car had got no tax on it, or had got an out-of-date tax disc. The registration number didn't exist. The tax disc was for a different vehicle, and the engine and chassis number appeared that they may have been tampered with.
All of a sudden he said to me, "This car's stolen." I said, "Stolen?" I said, "I've had this car nearly 2 years. This car's not stolen, this is a collector's item."
The vehicle was brought back to Tottenham Police Station, and he was booked in to custody procedure, and then we wrote down our notes.
Jarrett was well liked on the farm. He was suspicious of the police and gave them next to no help now. Police suspected he was hiding something and went to his parents' address near the farm. But Floyd no longer lived there. Looking for stolen property, police knocked on the door.
And there was no reply, but you could hear noise in the house. It was obvious that there was someone in there. And then I remembered that I'd got the keys with me. So I put the key in the door and opened the door.
Meanwhile, at Tottenham Police Station, Floyd Jarrett was being processed.
He brought me out to the desk, Sergeant, and said, "We're charging you for assault." I said, "Assault on who? I didn't assault anybody." And by the way, Mr. Jarrett, your mum's had a heart attack and she's died. But when he said it to me, I dismissed it. I thought he was trying to get a reaction from me or something. So I didn't react. I just listened to him and just, like, didn't believe what he was saying.
Floyd's mum was sitting in the house with her were her daughter and grandchildren. The search found nothing, but she collapsed. The police wanted to give first aid, but were ordered out.
And we were sort of trying to say, let us in. But I think that the family were too angry and upset, and there was no sort of communication taking place, and the door would shut, and then it would open again about 20 or 30 seconds later, and again it'd be like, where's the ambulance, where's the ambulance, get an ambulance. We said, we've called one.
They went too far. In 7 days. They went too far. They shot Miss Gross on the Saturday, and the following Saturday they killed my mum. How much more can we take? What had the black community done to deserve this? We had to make a stand somewhere along the line.
Cynthia Jarrett was like a second mum to Floyd's friends. For everyone, her death spread fear that another riot could erupt. Chief Superintendent Alan Stainsby visited the Jarrett home at Thorpe Road to express his regrets.
There's a whole range of emotions in there: tears, anger, frustration, very anti-police, quite an intimidating atmosphere, but it had to be done. I mean, I'm not just talking about telling them who's going to investigate it. Someone had got to sit down and say sorry.
At around midnight, the Jarretts went to a meeting at the police station. Outside, demonstrators demanded the suspension of the officers involved. 4 windows were broken. No one was arrested, no one was suspended. Police spent all that evening on the phone and in meetings in a desperate bid to avoid a riot. But as he drove home, veteran Tottenham copper Wally Porter feared where all this was heading.
You started to realise a riot and a fairly violent reaction was now almost inevitable. And I think that sense of disappointment and fear at the same time just sort of swept over me, and I just had to stop. I couldn't drive. And I just had to stop and get out and walk up and down for a few minutes, just trying to take deep breaths and think, God, what am I going to do next?
Nobody would have described Serial 502 of the Met Police as an elite fighting unit. One of them, Richard Coombs, was a community officer elsewhere in North London. This was the type of policeman whose role it was to foster good community relations, as much a social worker as a beat bobby.
42. I picked up the paper, and just in the stop press was a little thing that said a woman had been killed in a police raid, or died in a police raid in Tottenham. And although we've been told that we'd be patrolling High Road Wood Green, it's not many miles away from Tottenham, and you think, oh dear, I wonder what that's all about.
And then there was Steve Martin, just 19 years old and down from Liverpool, still finishing his training as a policeman in London. He was to have a baptism of fire.
Come the October time, I was still in my probation. I was 19 years old then, relatively inexperienced. We were called up on the main channel, and our call sign was Serial 502.
The first job of the day for Wally Porter was to deliver the Broadwater Farm contingency plan from Tottenham to Wood Green.
I had the plan on the front seat that contained some maps with estimates of the type of numbers and equipment that people would need in order to take possession of the walkways, and then give an opportunity for others to sweep in and take the ground level and disperse any disorderly groups.
Deputy Assistant Commissioner Mike Richards took charge of the Broadwater Farm contingency plan.
Sure, that's fine.
Richards was the senior officer in the control room that was set up in Wood Green, and so was in overall charge of the Met Police's response to what was to come. In anticipation of trouble, Scotland Yard had already ordered a baton gun team to report to his station later that day. After a night of rumours and threats, there was a lull on Broadwater Farm. This calm was not to last. The first policeman to approach the farm that morning was Community Liaison Officer Paul G. Dispatched to Tangmere to attend a meeting, it started reasonably enough, but with the arrival of one angry resident, the mood changed.
He started to shout and scream at me that the police had killed one of ours. Now we're going to kill the police and we'll start with you, looking quite clearly at me. And there I was, the victim, ready to be sacrificed.
For Paul G, on this occasion, it came to nothing. He returned to the police station as a gloomy messenger.
His message was that there would be a riot. It would be a lot worse than it happened in other parts of the country, and that police officers would die.
A restless crowd gathered outside Tottenham police station, again demanding the suspension of the officers who raided Cynthia Jarrett's home. Haringey youth worker Stafford Scott was sent to calm tempers and prevent trouble.
I didn't want to see that in my backyard. I didn't believe that we would gain anything, even if you were able to destroy Tottenham police station that night. So we decided to take the crowd away.
It was fairly soon after that demonstration dispersed that you started to get calls to the estate, which were 999 calls. The decision had already been made that we will not respond to calls because there were concerns that we were going to send people into very dangerous situations.
At 3:30, two officers were lured to the estate and very badly beaten. The police would later identify this as the moment when the contingency plan should have been initiated. In the control room at Wood Green, they were, by all accounts, unaware of the attack on the two officers. Far from implementing the contingency plan, men were stood down. Trained riot officers were sent home. At the Youth Association in Tangmere House, another angry meeting was in full swing. Somebody had to pay for the death of Cynthia Jarrett. There was talk of an eye for an eye. Chief Superintendent Alan Stainsbury clocked on at Wood Green.
I couldn't believe that we'd had all those officers on during the daytime, and for some reason we'd stood them down and they were on their way home when the riot started. Common sense seems to dictate to me that you would have waited until the hours of darkness had developed a little bit before you dismissed men. But nevertheless, that's the circumstance that happened.
The meeting at Tangmere decided to march back to Tottenham police station. There is no agreed account of why trouble then flared on Willen Road. One thing is certain, the demonstrators never reached the police station.
So a decision was taken to block us in on Broadwater Farm. We were here at the exit of the farm, and someone looked in this direction and said, "Ah, look, man." And when we looked, the road was just jammed with police vans. And they weren't ordinary police vans, they were riot vans. They were a new kind that many of us had never ever seen before. People didn't know what was going to happen. The vans turned up. These officers came out of these vans, officers came out of these vans, and they started to push us back down on the estate. Get back down there, get back down there. You're not going nowhere. Get back down there. Get back in your hole. Get back in your fucking place, you black bastards. You're not going nowhere. And people were saying, we're trapped, we're trapped, we're trapped. So the fear factor rose. One person who probably had more anger than fear said, we don't have to take this. We haven't done nothing. Why are you all behaving like this? Why are you crying? Why are you screaming? What are you scared of? And he picked up a stone. And when he picked up the stone, people started to move back. There was lots of crying going on at the time. When he launched the stone from around here, in this direction here, all of a sudden, it went deadly quiet. Screens were cut off halfway through. Everyone watched the stone because everyone knew the significance of it. So they saw him throw and they watched the stone go through the air and watched as it came down behind the police lines here. And then the instant response after that was to move away from it. Because everyone expected, our experience has always been that, you know, if you do something like that, the snatch squad's going to come and grab you. People moved away from him. The snatch squad didn't grab him. So he turned to the crowd, he said, see, come on, we're going to have to take this. He bent down, he took up another stone, and again, he threw the stone and people moved away, and we watched it come down behind the police lines, and we heard the grunt of an officer as it hit. And then everyone moved even further away because they definitely expected him to get arrested this time. When nothing happened and he went down on the third occasion, there was a whoop went up in the crowd. People said, yeah, as if to say, well, this is what we do. When put under attack, we fight back.
Simultaneously, fighting erupted on other streets. What the farm now needed was serious public order experience. But Colin Couch's talents lay in the art of community policing. At the farm that night, he would face his toughest test. Serial 502 was a mixture of community bobbies from other parts of London and probationers fresh out of college. Down at Wood Green, they were preparing for a riot. PC's Keith Blakelock, Richard Coombs and Steve Martin had little idea of what lay ahead.
I'd never been in a situation where I'd had to put this sort of kit on before. There was a lot of nervous chit-chat, a lot of nervous laughter. The overalls I got were, I don't know who they were made for, but it was somebody considerably larger than me. Big long shields, short shields, riot helmets, riot suits. And we got ourselves kitted out for something that we weren't really expecting.
And then I booked the van out and we loaded 12 blokes into the back of a Sherpa van, which is no mean feat. If you've ever seen the back of a Sherpa van, it's not really big.
Those dozen men of Serial 502 heading for the farm were not frontline troops. It was in no one's mind to send them into the heat of the battle. Sergeant Chris Sevier was in charge of another serial. As they arrived, they got an extremely hostile reception.
Our inspector got out and walked to the corner and got hit with stuff as he got to the corner. It was just showered with bricks and bottles come flying at him. So we deployed immediately into the junction with shields and was there for quite some time having stuff thrown at us.
Must have been pretty terrifying.
I was frightened, and it's not an easy thing to say, but I was terrified. I was shaking, but it wasn't only me, everybody was doing the same thing, or the vast majority. And what went through my mind was, can I get a small injury and go to hospital, please? But you can't. You're doing a job. You're trained to do the job, and you just can't run away. You've got to stay there and do it.
Chris Sevier and his serial of officers came under attack here at Griffin Road. Sergeant Bob Hughes led his men towards the action at Adams Road, just one street over.
Well, the first thing we had to do was we had to abandon the van because we couldn't get any further, and I'm pretty sure it was somewhere along here. I can't be absolutely certain now. And when we got out, I decided that we would deploy with short shields, which is the round shields that you see officers with, instead of the long shields, you know, the tall ones. If we took long shields out, inevitably we would end up at the front and we would be the ones that were going down. Because as the successive rows of shields reached the front, they were knocked down by the sheer volume of debris.
So you took the short shields effectively to avoid having to be put at the front?
Oh yeah, yeah. One of my better decisions, yeah.
It was on these two streets that the battles were being fought. On Adams Road and Griffin Road, lines of officers were taking terrible punishment.
Unit calling for urgent assistance.
2 miles away at Wood Green, the officers in the control room were doing their best to make sense of what was happening.
Go ahead. Gloucester Junction, Handsworth.
You've got people there taking radio messages from the estate here. You've got people taking radio messages from Scotland Yard because other stuff's coming in on 999. There's telephones, there's people plotting on a board. You're recording all the units that book on. You're recording the jobs you've given them. You're trying to keep track of the whole operation. But the whole situation was already moving faster than we could control it. There were messages on the desk, people asking for urgent police help. They were nearly 20 minutes old because there weren't officers to send. As fast as officers were coming back to us, we were sending them out.
Stay at the location and control the situation.
Not everywhere was madness and mayhem. At the Gloucester Road end of the estate, all was quiet. It was here that Richard Coombs and Serial 502 arrived in their van.
As we arrived, there were still other units there. There were 2 or 3 other units there, but because it was so quiet there, they got back into their vans and they went, which just left us standing on the corner.
We were just left there. I got the impression that we were put there because we weren't an experienced unit and we were pretty much in reserve, and we wouldn't be used unless it was a sort of last resort. And so we waited and we waited.
Across the farm at Adams Road, Bob Hughes and his men were being bombarded with anything that came to hand.
I vividly remember standing just here, taking strikes all the time off of quite a wild variety of incoming. Things like tins of peas, tins of beans, spanners, which I think had come from either Tangmere, the shops, or from the vehicles that had been broken into on the estate. And this stuff coming, you know, zooming in and crashing down around you. And I can remember vividly crouching down and looking up into the streetlights and seeing just the sheer debris coming over. The comparison I use is that of a flock of starlings. You know how a flock of starlings just wheels and moves? Well, as you look up, then you could see into the streetlights. All you could see was debris, 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 and it actually was piling up around you.
At Griffin Road and Adams Road, the rioters had guns.
For the first time in the recent disturbances, the police came under gunfire. A shotgun fired from the council flats injured 3 policemen, 1 seriously.
At one point, I felt a bang on the shield, and someone said, "You've got a hole in the shield." If you're standing beside the shield, it comes up to like your shoulder, and there's a crease about a foot or so below the top, so there's like a bend in the shield. The bullet hole went through the crease, which means that where you're normally sort of in a stooped position, your head is normally right in line with that crease in the shield. But I'm a coward. I was well down below that.
Rocks, petrol bombs, and now guns, and still they were ordered to stand there. In the absence of baton guns, the police improvised.
The police themselves, who were now outside of the farm perimeter, at certain times, a whistle would go off. At the time, the police lines were such that they had the long shields employed. They had rows and rows and rows of police, long shields. The shields that were placed over the heads of some officers were raised. The officers who had shields then started to move forward. Shield first, then boots. Shield next, and then boots. When they get to these boundaries, on the estate almost, the whistle goes off, the shields go down, shields on top came across, and everybody went down. And then the whistle went off, and then their shields will come up the top, and they'll start going backwards. Hundreds of them. And everyone's looking, and all those people who had gone into this state now, they're starting to come out again. And what actually happened was the police had covered all of the missiles that had been thrown at them previously. They'd picked up the artillery or the weapons, they backed off, bringing out the crowd, and then they launched an attack.
I think it's fair to say that yes, we did award a few back in the opposite direction.
Did you throw anything back?
Oh yeah, I sent a piece of masonry down, and I remember the arc that it came in at, and it hit a young lad on the head, and it took off again in much a similar arc. It did worry me a bit, because it must have been a significant injury, I should think, but that's all I remember of that.
The noise, it's something I've never been really used to. And I'd done the Brixton riots a week or so before that, but that seemed easy compared to what this was. We were sort of trapped into a junction, and then everything would go quiet, and you'd hear the next junction being attacked. And then whistles would blow, and they'd come back to that junction. And it was as if it was orchestrated, definitely organised from within the estate itself. There was as if there was a rank structure there.
The idea that something was organised is yeah, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. It would be laughable. It is laughable. The police had to put out they was organised because they took a bloody good hiding.
The control room at Wood Green was still inundated with cries for help. But the lack of coherent information was making it difficult to take strategic decisions.
I was desperate to get out here because I'm not a good person at sitting on my fingers in control rooms. We got to a point where there were very few situation reports coming back in to let us have an idea in the control room what was happening. And that's when I came out here to Mount Pleasant Road with 20 officers.
So ferocious were the attacks at Griffin and Adams Roads that a call was put in to the Police Commissioner, Sir Kenneth Newman. For half an hour, senior officers had argued heatedly about whether to use CS gas and rubber bullets. The Commissioner approved, but left the decision to his officers on the ground. This was potentially an historic decision. Rubber bullets had never been used on mainland Britain. In the event, and to the dismay of the officers under attack, the baton gunners were never called into action. Things were still relatively quiet near the notorious Tangmere House. Here at Gloucester Road sat Serial 502 and Chief Superintendent Colin Couch. Though short on public order training, he was one of the senior officers on the ground. Then reports started coming through of a fire. The supermarket on the mezzanine floor in Tangmere House was ablaze. Colin Couch decided the fire crews needed protection and radioed the control room for assistance. Overwhelmed, they were unable to respond quickly enough.
Yes, all received. Yankee Tango 5-1.
The only people available close to the fire were the men of Serial 502, which included PC Keith Blakelock. None of them knew the estate.
We were going in to protect the fire brigade, who were going to go in and put the fire out. And as soon as the fire had been put out, we were going to withdraw.
And we went off down the path, and I remember everybody looked at each other and to say, I don't like the sound of this too much. And I remember saying, as if to nobody, we need to get in there pretty quick and come out again pretty quick.
While the probationers and community bobbies of Serial 502 prepared to go in, van loads of officers were still in reserve. John McCaskill was among one group of 50 angry and frustrated men.
your colleagues are out there getting whatever they were getting, and you weren't in any way, shape or form able to help them. I would imagine there would be 50, 55 police officers. And 55 police officers running flat out with a stick in their hand. They can make a nasty mess of these morons that were in front of us, but obviously nobody had the power or the wherewithal to take that on board.
As Serial 502 escorted the firemen towards the blaze above them in Tangmere, word spread amongst the rioters. The police were on the farm.
I think that we were kind of perhaps lulled into a false sense of security, and that it'd been so quiet for so long that we thought, well, nothing possibly bad can happen, because it's all happening over the other side of the estate, you know. What we've forgotten is that there are these walkways which, if you know them, enable you to get from one side of the Broadwater Farm to the other very, very quickly.
We were sort of banging on our shields and all that sort of thing, which was a bit of a laugh, really, because, I mean, we were only probationers and community officers. We didn't really know what to expect. I remember having a conversation with, I think it was Dick Coombs and Keith Blakelock, and Keith was saying that whenever he'd been to an incident like this, nothing ever happened. The visors were down. We started moving across the grass towards the underground car park. And from the underground car park, there's some steps that go up to the deck of Tangmere. There weren't many people about, but I was aware of people still moving about on the walkways. We got up onto the deck of Tangmere, and you can see down into the underground car park. I could see people with their faces covered coming from underneath the Tangmere block, carrying bottles, long, sort of machete-type instruments.
The rioters that poured in underneath Tangmere raced up the stairs leading to the deck.
A bell rang, and before we knew it, out of the darkness from the stairwells in front of us, appeared a number of people, all masked, all with bottles, and there was a kind of Mexican standoff, if you like, where they didn't really know what their next move was going to be, and we sure as hell didn't know what our next move was going to be. We were trapped. We were up there, and we were surrounded.
Over on the other side of the farm, Chief Superintendent Alan Stainsby had arrived with his 20 reserve officers.
Each of the entrances was coming under attack at different times. It wasn't all the entrances having problems, so there were these little lulls. We were just in the process of briefing our officers, or I was briefing my 20 people to go in and take over, when the message came from Gloucester Road about a serial in serious trouble.
Unit calling for urgent assistance.
That serial was number 502, with Keith Blakelock, Steve Martin and Richard Coombs. They were still on the deck at Tangmere, but were being forced back towards the stairs. They now realised they were fighting for their lives.
But you've got that sense, that feeling, that that's what they wanted to kill as many police officers as they possibly can. And they were shouting, kill the bill, kill the pigs.
We kept ourselves pretty much together, and we backed off towards the top of the stairs. By this time, the crowd were pretty much on top of us.
Every time I think about it, it makes me go cold, because I just, it's that feeling that you're penned in and trapped.
It then began to get very dark as we went downstairs, and we were brushing against the sides of the walls, and the shields were scraping against the walls. At this point, I knew that we really were in serious trouble.
The stairs took them down into the car park, which was by now full of armed rioters waiting for the officers.
I remember looking behind me at one point, and there were rioters all around. I remember thinking to myself, if I can get out of this, I've still got this to deal with behind. And it was almost becoming a hopeless situation.
The two fought their way through the covered car park towards the edge of the estate and safety.
And I remember at that point turning round and seeing in the darkness a group of people round what looked like a bunch of rags on the floor. And something in me told me that that was a police officer. Don't ask me what, just kind of had that feeling that it was a police officer. And I couldn't see clearly. All I had this impression, and it's one that I shall always have with me, is it was like vultures pecking at something on the ground because of the silhouette of the colours and all the rest of it.
It's difficult to describe what you feel when you can see one of your colleagues on the floor being attacked by so many people, and you can see their arms moving up and moving down and moving up and moving down, and with machetes and knives just cutting into his body. And although it was from a distance, I knew exactly what was happening.
PC Keith Blakelock tripped over the low wall that separated the car park from the grass. Once down, he was defenceless.
The only thing I had was this truncheon and my shield. I just ran as fast as my legs would take me, and I used up all the energy that I had in my lungs, and I just screamed like a banshee and just ran into the crowd. And just made as much contact as I could, really.
And I was running then towards where what I now know as Keith's body. And all the time you're being attacked as you're running. And at some stage I was fell to the ground.
I knew that if I were to fall over, then there's a good chance that that I could be killed without any shadow of a doubt. The sensation that I was feeling is very much like where you have the noise of a swimming pool. You can hear the noise above the water, and then you dive into the pool. All you can hear is yourself. You can hear perhaps your own heart, but you can hear muffled noise in the background perhaps. When I look back on the incident, the noises that I could hear were pretty much the same. It is very similar to that above the water and below the water experience.
With Steve Martin drifting towards unconsciousness and worse, the very firemen he'd gone in to protect now did the same for him.
If it hadn't been for the two guys from the fire brigade, then I don't know. I don't know what would have happened to me, really.
Steve Martin was badly shaken but unhurt. Richard Coombs, the second officer to fall at Tangmere, was in a critical condition. Both were taken to hospital. Keith Blakelock was dead, hacked and stabbed to death by a mob. He had 40 separate wounds. Alan Stainsby arrived at Gloucester Road. The rest of Serial 502 were retreating in shock to their vans.
Every different type of behaviour. There was one guy I can still remember in the front garden beating a bush with a truncheon. Another man was just sat quietly on the edge of the pavement, crying into his hands. The whole range of emotions you'll get from a group of people who work together on a daily basis and get sent somewhere and exposed to the horror of losing one of their colleagues. They knew they'd lost Keith Blakelock.
The news that an officer had been killed spread quickly across the farm. Their anger spent, rioters started to drift away. Keith Blakelock's death stunned rank-and-file police officers. Many were reduced to tears of anger, frustration and bewilderment. Police remained in strength into the early hours of the morning when they received a visit from Sir Kenneth Newman, Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.
The boss man himself came down, did he not?
Oh, the metronome, Mr. Newman. We call him a metronome because he's a midget. And he was walking up with his entourage. Just in front of him, there was a carrier door went, and all the blokes got on the carrier and slammed the door. And he walked past that one, then he got to the next one, door shut. Then the next one, and the door shut. Just a clunk, 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 as he was walking up. Because everybody that was there did not want to speak to him, well, other than the normal bag carriers and toilet seat wipers, you know, they'd always want to speak to the Commissioner. But it was certainly a demonstration of discontent by a large amount of police officers.
In the weeks that followed, there would be questions aplenty to ask. That night, Steve Martin's was the obvious one.
Why? Why were they so angry that they had to kill somebody who was married with children and just went to work like we all do to earn money to support his family? He was another human being. He didn't deserve to die like that.
At 4:30, the police, carrying baton guns and in overwhelming numbers, took the farm. They met no resistance. But the Broadwater Farm was now a murder scene.
This Monday morning, a policeman has been stabbed to death in overnight rioting in Tottenham in North London. And for the first time, rioters have used guns.
The Met's first thoughts the next morning were for the Blakelock family. Inspector Dick Shepherd was sent to look after Keith's wife Liz and their 3 young boys.
The boys were just lost souls. They just wandered from adult to adult, and it was harrowing sometimes because every half an hour Keith's face would be flashed on the screen. It was just one long torment for the family.
Named as PC Keith Blakelock, aged 40, married with 3 children.
One of the boys just went up to the television and sort of hugged the screen as his father's picture appeared on the screen. What can you do?
Within hours, a murder team had been assembled, headed by Detective Chief Superintendent Graham Melvin. But police at the scene were not thinking like detectives and stood by while Harringay Council cleared up. Debris was removed to stop it being used in a second night of rioting, but the debris was also the evidence.
We failed to put a cordon around that, and therefore we lost much evidence in those first hours. It's true to say as well that much was burnt, and much clothing was, from the rioters was burnt. Knives were thrown into bins and all that sort of thing. But so we lost a great deal.
With no forensic evidence, the police needed eyewitnesses and confessions. Within a week, Winston Silcott found himself in a cell.
I must have dozed off. I can't remember the actual time span. But I was aware of people in the cell. When I've opened up my eyes, there's about 4 or 5 police officers, and all of a sudden, they've rushed me.
What's going on? What are you doing?
thinking that they're gonna beat me up or something. And they pull me into the custody suite. And as I'm struggling, there's a camera on a tripod with a man behind the camera. All of a sudden, the police officers let go of my hands because of the tension of me struggling. Slowly rise like this, and the police officer starts taking pictures of me.
This was how the image that has come to define Winston Silcott in the public mind was born. Over the next 15 months, police laid siege to the farm.
It was rage, pure rage. I remember one officer's fronting me, facing me and telling me, I'm not one of those Tottenham coppers. I don't fuck about, I'm from Chelsea. And then he offered to take me over the park and have a fight with me.
Everyone was a suspect. Arriving outside Stafford Scott's house, the police were armed.
I saw a point go across, the person bend, stoop and go across, but the point was up. And I know it was a gun. So I asked myself the question, what the hell is this? I went up there, opened the curtain, saw the police kneeling down there with the gun turned towards the door.
Officers put firearms on me, and I mean pressed them in, as other officers took my arms, handcuffed me behind my back, handcuffed my legs.
And they took every knife I had in the kitchen. They emptied the things, they take my utensils, everything. They take all my food.
And he just looked at me and said, Stafford Scott, I'm arresting you for the murder of PC Blakelock and the riot that took place on October the 6th on Broadwater Farm.
I always respect police, and I would never go out there and be rude to one. No, I will do it. I won't help them at all now.
Stafford Scott had only been on the farm acting for Haringey Council. Police needed witnesses and cooperation, but this approach meant people closed ranks against them. The police blamed lack of progress on a climate of fear, little imagining their approach might contribute.
The police said that they came here and there was a climate of fear. There's no doubt about that. This is one of the few things that both sides agree. What we say, though, is that the climate of fear was created by the police. That, you know, by the mere fact that they said the day after that everybody who was on Broadwater Farm that night was a potential murder suspect. People who could have been witnesses were actually turned off from being witnesses.
That those involved in the riots and the crimes of that night were petrified that we would find out who they were. So there was a climate of fear amongst them, fear of detection, fear of discovery.
Police believed that Winston Silcott, Sticks to his friends, was the ringleader on the night. In 4 interviews, he said almost nothing, but other suspects were starting to talk. When 13-year-old Jason Hill had been dragged in, he'd quickly confessed to stealing chocolate. But then he'd produced a horrific story. The killers had wanted to put Keith Blakelock's head on a pole. Now, after a night in just his underpants and a blanket, he was about to confess to murder.
Why were you taken over to the body?
Because it seemed too much.
What did you do with the sword?
The first time, I had to go over another cut. The second time, I had to make my own mark.
Why did you have to slash the policeman a second time?
Because Sticks said I had to make my own mark.
Was Sticks in charge of the attack?
No, he wasn't in charge. If Sticks said or did anything, everyone else copied and followed.
At just after 7 p.m. on the 13th of October, Graham Melvin and his deputy, Max Dingle, began their 5th and final interview with Winston Silcott. Their account of what happened next would get Winston Silcott convicted, but it would return to haunt the detectives. the police had taken more than 1,000 photographs at the riot. Local officers had told Graham Melvin that they had some of Winston's Silcott.
Got a number of photographs here that were taken during the evening of the violence on the 6th of October on the Broadwater Farm estate. Please have a look at them.
That's not me. I'm black. He's light-skinned, and his nose is wrong.
A photograph.
You told me. You know it all. If that's all you got nothing, man. You've made a mistake. That's not me, and you're trying to say that's me. That's stupid, man.
It was obvious that the identification by the local officers was indeed wrong.
What was your reaction to
that? The word disappointment comes into mind, but perhaps it was a lot more acute than that. What the interview was going to be structured around had now gone. A bit of a kick, really. A bit of a kick, that one.
I think you were there that night. I think you were leaning over the body of PC Blakelock. I think you had either a machete or some kind of sword which you hit him with.
Who told you that?
I'm not at liberty to tell you who told me about your part in his murder. Suffice to say that I was told you played an active part.
You've only had kids in so far, haven't you?
If it had only been one person who told me about your part in the crime, I wouldn't be so sure that you were the ringleader that night. Well, but when others come along and tell the same story, the facts become clear.
Winston Silcott has always insisted he said none of these things and that he gave his interrogators no help at all.
Jesus. Did you murder Police Constable Blakelock?
You ain't got enough evidence. Those kids will never go to court. Nobody else will talk to you. You can't keep me away from them.
What do you mean by that?
I ain't saying no more. And you've got a big surprise coming. You'll probably be out of a job.
Are you trying to tell me that any witnesses are in danger from you?
Just take me down and charge me. You ain't got no evidence. I ain't saying no more. I ain't signing anything. You ain't got no evidence.
The account Jason Hill had given of that night's events had strayed from the known facts, but the police apparently ignored this. PC Blakelock's murder had been a frenzied affair with no time for the bizarre rituals he described. The investigation was producing results, but were they reliable? When he found himself sitting opposite a different detective, Jason Hill retracted his story.
Police officer, he made me say I was at the murder. I didn't know about the murder till the next day. I read about it on teletext.
Nevertheless, Jason Hill was one of 3 juveniles to be charged with murder. There were 3 adults also charged. One of them was Winston Silcott. At the trial, the judge threw out the case against the juveniles, describing Hill's story as fantasy. The only evidence against Winston Silcott was the police record of that 5th interview. But the jury still returned a guilty verdict. What the jury hadn't known, and what the tabloids now trumpeted, was that Winston Silcott was already serving a life sentence for killing Anthony Smith in a fight at a party. Silcott says that it was the Smith conviction that stopped him giving evidence in his own defence in the Blakelock trial. If he'd accused the police of making up the interview, the prosecution could have told the jury about the Smith murder.
For me to go in the dock and say to the members of the jury that the evidence against me was fabricated, the police are telling lies, it's all rubbish. Obviously, how the courts work, they refer to your criminal convictions and they bring your criminal convictions out. So now, imagine the scenario if they brought my criminal conviction out, that I'm already serving a life sentence to the jury, right? The jury would have no qualms. Well, Willie's already in there. That's obviously going to take their mind straight away.
Now, in his own words, Winston Silcott tells his story of what happened that night. Silcott had been on bail for the Smith murder during the run-up to the Broadwater Farm Riot. He'd spent Saturday with his girlfriend Helena and hadn't heard the news about Cynthia Jarrett's death.
Yeah? I'm here to sign.
Hang on, I have to call you back. You've got a pen?
That Sunday evening, he'd come back to Tottenham police station to sign on.
In the police station, I'm just totally ignored by the police. They just walk past me like we're not there. There was a couple of other people there to sign on as well at the time. And they just walk right past us, and then one stopped and says, what do you want? So I said to sign on. This process takes about, say, 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? Something big's happening in Tottenham because something's going down and something's wrong.
After signing on, Winston Silcott's girlfriend dropped him back at the farm. He went to Tangmere to check on his greengrocers.
I go to my shop just to make sure there's no damage or whatever. But as I'm hanging around and listening to people, this is when I realise Cynthia Jarrett died the night before. Who I knew the Jarretts. So I was thinking, this is a liberty, this is.
He heard about meetings at the Youth Association and a march on Tottenham police station. But he knew this was perilous territory for a man already on bail for murder.
I grew up with some of the Jarretts. My heart, I wanted to be there. But because of the position I was in, I knew it was like totally impossible to all the rumours and what was being said, what was happening. I said, well, if I was in that situation, obviously they're going to try to take away my bail.
Things were heating up on the farm. Silcott says a friend offered him a place out of the way.
This woman, Pam Maguire, who lived on the Broadwater Farm, she said, listen, Winston, you don't want to be amongst all this. You know you're the first person they're going to come for or whatever. I went up to her house with her, where she lived there with her 3 sisters. Went into the flat. There was already a few people up there. Some people was like just talking in general and watching Kung Fu movies. But while I was watching the Kung Fu movies, I fell asleep. My first knowledge of a police officer had died was when there was a cheering in the house I was in. That's what woke me up, that it came on the news that police officer had been killed. My belief that they were cheering that because they think the police had it coming for all the hassle and the harassment and brutality was for what went on before.
The Maguires won't speak to us about that night and didn't appear in court at the time. But over the next 4 years, doubts about the convictions of Silcott and his 2 co-defendants grew, keeping their names in the public eye. The police technique that would clear him had been adopted in the late 70s to deal with forgery. Police interviews were supposed to be written down contemporaneously in official notebooks. Pressure from the pen on one page will leave an impression on the page beneath it. Electrostatic document analysis shows up this impression. Any interruption in the sequence of impressions could suggest pages have been altered or added later. In the summer of 1991, the test was done on the notes of Winston Silcott's crucial 5th interview.
Good evening. Winston Silcott, one of the so-called Tottenham 3, jailed for life after the murder of a policeman in the Broadwater Farm Riot 6 years ago, has been cleared by the appeal court. The Crown said scientific evidence showed Silcott's alleged confession could no longer be relied upon.
As evidence on which to base a murder conviction, and that's all there was, the interview was worthless. In clearing Silcott, the appeal court judges made an unprecedented apology to him. The Metropolitan Police would later pay him £50,000. Detectives Graham Melvin and Max Dingle were suspended.
It was a shock. Most people will tell you that I was quite a proud police officer and an active police officer. Be suspended over allegations which you knew were totally unfounded was a kick in a most uncomfortable place.
In 1994, Graham Melvin and Max Dingle stood trial for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Melvin was also charged with perjury. They were cleared. None of this brings us closer to an answer to the question, who did kill PC Blakelock?
In a strange sort of way, the Blakelock family and your interests will be better served by finding the real killers.
Well, it would be. And that's why I think now there should be a public inquiry from start to finish and look into every aspect throughout the whole thing.
A public inquiry is unlikely, but a third police murder investigation launched in December 2003 will face significant hurdles. Many police officers still bear the scars of that terrible violence, and the wounds inflicted on the black community in Tottenham are just as deep. But these are the people on whom the police are depending for answers. The killers are still out there, and that exacerbates a continuing climate of fear. That night, there were no winners. The death of Cynthia Jarrett triggered a series of events which continue to haunt all of those they touched.
I wish there was a way I could have expressed my condolences to the Jarrett family and to the Blakelocks. You know, I wish there was some way that I could have gone back and said, look, I really am sorry. I really am sorry about your mum dying. But we didn't do anything wrong. And I wish... Sorry, but I wish I'd taken the time to go and speak to Mrs. Blakelock and to see her and her sons and sort of say to them, you know, we didn't do it. Sorry. We didn't do it.